Welcome to the May 9th, 2018, The Nutritionist webinar. I'm Marianne Fessenden from AMTS and your English language host. This monthly webinar series is dedicated to providing technical talks from internationally recognized educators for listeners around the world. Paula Torrillo from Cordoba, Argentina translates and hosts the Spanish language webinar, and Tom Long from Hemingway in China will be hosting in Mandarin today. There will be a question and answer period following the presentation. Listeners can submit questions through me, Paula, or Tom. A complete recording of archived webinars as well as a question and answer session for each will be available on the AMTS website. For those of you who would listen to the presentations while driving, and we have quite a few, we have converted the videos to MP3 files that can be downloaded to your device for offline listening. Very pleased to host Dr. Phil Cardoso today. He's an assistant professor of animal sciences at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, where he conducts research and provides outreach programs in the area of dairy nutrition and reproduction. Dr. Cardoso was born and raised in Brazil and soon discovered his passion, dairy cows, and got involved with livestock operations in the southern part of Brazil. His experience with dairy farms in Brazil and the USA brings a different perspective and management skills to his research and teaching. He obtained a PhD degree in ruminant nutrition from the University of Illinois and master's and DVM degrees from the College of Veterinary Medicine at Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul, and he can correct me on that, UFRGS in Porto I'm not even going to try, Algeria, Brazil. He's open. He can pronounce this for me. How do you say, where did you go to school for your veterinary medicine degree, Dr. Cardoso?
So that would be Porto Alegre.
Thank you. So beautiful when you say it. Phil will deliver the final presentation focusing on transition cow nutrition. This is part of our series. We had Laura Hernandez in March, Tom Overton in April, and Dr. Cardoso is bringing it to a close. So thank you, Phil, for joining us. Paula and I are going to be punchy because this is our second webinar for the day, so we're all warmed up. To the audience, if you have questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat or the question and answer window. We'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Additionally, we have a few videos incorporated into Phil's presentation. I will have to briefly interrupt to cue them up. So I'm going to thank you, Phil. I'm going to turn it all over to you so that you can progress the slides, and then I will mute myself and become mostly quiet.
Okay.
Mostly.
Thank you very much, Marianne, and I like the mostly. That means that we're going to be hearing from you at some point.
Yeah.
Hopefully some laughs or something.
Well, yeah. We'll see. Okay. I'm going to be quiet now. Okay. Bye.
And thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this webinar series. I mean, it's amazing, how many good speakers and, very nice people that were talking and then we'll be talking. I'm very pleased to and very humble to be part of this team. I would like to share a little bit of the information that we've collected at the University of Illinois throughout this years that I've been assistant professor there, and I also try to bring a little bit of information from other research groups that kind of hopefully will tell you a story and kind of make my point here. So I'll get started here. Let's see if I can. By showing this picture, okay, there's a cow just calved, and any place I go in the world, and I can be talking to farmers, students, or people in academia, and I ask, hey, what do you want from this cow, right? And everybody tells me the same thing. Everybody gets it right. We want that cow to be healthy, no diseases. We want her to be producing a lot of milk, and also we want her to breed back. And they know they want that, and the reason they want that because they know that with those things, money or profitability is going to come. So what we as, I think, researchers have to take the charge is, okay, that's what farmers need. How can we give that? So I think that's kind of the way that anything that we can feed during the transition period, we have to make an assessment, hopefully not just only on the health part of the things on the production, but also is that impacting if that cow is going to breed back again and get pregnant or not. So that's hopefully what I'm going to try to do here, tell a story that gives back those 3 points to the farmers that you guys are working with, or if you're a farmer, that's what you want for your herd, right? This is an old story. We know that cows have been producing more and more milk, and we know that conception rate or fertility have been going down. Nonetheless, since 2009, when we start paying more attention and maybe breeding or selecting more for fertility items, more recently with daughter pregnancy rate, we've been able to turn that around. But we always have that map on our mind that, okay, cows are producing more and more milk. However, fertility has been decreasing. And one of the points that I want to make is that, an association is not a causation, and that brings a lot of problems for us in our society. Back to kids, where we should not vaccinate kids because that makes them have problems. Back here, I'm going to try to justify this association and not causation by showing some very nice data from Santos in his time in California. So a pretty good amount of cows, more than 6,000 cows. And what he did was to classify those cows in those 4 herds and cows that are producing less milk or more milk. So he divided in quartiles. So you can see here that if not, you can see that the group that produce less milk or more milk, if anything, the group that are producing more milk came more in heat or were cycling by 65 days in milk. And at the same point, the cows that are producing more milk, they also got more pregnant, or a higher proportion or percentage of them getting pregnant when compared to cows that produce less milk. So my point here being that, yes, high milk production can happen with good fertility. But of course, when you talk about these cows that are producing more, perhaps they're going to be more confounded with better management, better comfort, better nutrition. And that's one point that is hugely important, and I think Gordy Jones is going to talk about this in the next webinar. That's about comfort and behavior. We are not going to talk about it here, but it's hugely important during that transition period and for cows to be able to breed back or good reproduction and also milk production. We're going to talk more on the nutrition side of things on this webinar. The other thing that sometimes gets a little bit not as well looked at in farms is the embryonic loss. So pretty much when we check cows, they're pregnant. When we check cows again, they're not pregnant anymore. What happened there? So this is a very interesting table. So putting together here several trials, okay, where they have different types of treatment. That's not very relevant, but they all preg check cows at around 30 days, and they preg check cows again around 45 days, let's say. Here's the difference in days from one point to the other one. And you can see here that roughly from 10 to 20% of those cows lost their pregnancy, or their embryo just disappear. So we may agree that, hey, let's say 15% is something that is normal. So one of the things that right off the bat I'm going to say and encourage you guys to check at your farms or the farms that you're working with, what is your number? So if you palpate cows at 30 days and then at 45, what's your number? And follow that through time just to make sure that things are okay for your farm. And if it is 15%, again, that's something that we consider normal or physiological. But I'm going to make a case here that I'm going to go back to this number in the end of the presentation, and I'm saying we have opportunities to improve this number here.
Dr. Cardoso?
Yep.
Could you slow down just a little bit? The translators are struggling.
Oh, really? So I need to speak a little bit more fast.
Yeah, that's what I said. They will appreciate it so much.
Okay. Or I can speak a little bit in English, un poquito en español para ser un poco.
That probably would help a lot.
Perfecto. But in Chinese, then it's just ni hao ma. That's it.
Yeah, that's
I got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
I will
you.
speak a little bit more despacito.
Okay.
The other point that we want to make here is that things that are happening during the transition period they also are going to affect reproduction. And I'm showing here one of the former José Santos student. Now he's at the University of Guelph. Did a pretty nice work here where he classified first cows that had a health problem or not. And he classified that in a single clinical case or subclinical, and multiple clinical cases or multiple subclinical cases. And one of the things that we can see this when you look at pregnancy, that when I compare cows that don't have the disease, they perform better or they are more pregnant at day 30 than cows that had a single clinical case or multiple clinical cases. And the same thing happens with subclinical when they have two, and that could be subclinical ketosis, subclinical hypocalcemia, if they have subclinical metritis. Those are some of the diseases that we're talking about, the hypocalcemia, or in this case, milk fever, clinical or subclinical. So one of the ideas is that there are factors that are happening at that cow during the transition period. So those disorders are happening early lactation, but they may be affecting all those follicles that are coming through the wave in the ovaries, and that's the follicles that most likely we are going to be breeding those cows to at 60 to 70 or 90 days after calving, right? So this is one of the proposals. I mean, we are not 100% sure of how much that will take, but we would say 90 to 100 days it's going to take from a primordial follicle to become that follicle that's going to ovulate and we're going to breed. And that's why most of the time when we have a heat stress problem, for example, we don't see the effect right away, but we're going to see that effect 2-3 months later. That's when we're going to be having trouble getting those cows pregnant, or preg rates or conception rates is going to be down. We're going to be down at that point. So everything that we do that prevents disorders around the transition period, they are going to impact fertility and conception rates of those cows. Now, when we talk about pregnancy, and this is kind of like a very short summary, there are 7 points, 7 factors that are going to affect pregnancy. That's it, those 7. Today, we are going to cover body condition score and talk about uterine evolution and that uterine environment. We are going to talk about the ovulation and fertilization of the quality of oocyte, some idea and assessment on the quality of the oocyte. And we're also going to talk about an embryo producing that thing called interferon tau. So if we go back and we think about it, okay, we are breeding a cow, so that would be day 0 or day 1. At day 14 to 18, that's a huge moment, or that embryo is going to start signaling the cow and saying, hey, please, don't come in heat again because you're pregnant, okay? And that signaling, that little voice, is sent by this protein called interferon tau. And the point that I want to make is that the size of the embryo is directly related with the amount of interferon tau that is being produced by the embryo, and it gets to the cow to tell her that she's pregnant. Please, don't come in heat again. So I'm going to come back to this concept as well in the end. So larger embryos, they're going to produce more interferon tau. They're going to have more chances or a stronger signal to tell the cow that she's pregnant. And that is also involved in cows getting pregnant or not. So we're going to talk about these 3 points today. This is what I think should be our proposed transition period. So we usually classify, okay, cows 3 weeks before calving and cows 3 weeks after calving. That's the transition period. But like I said, we, as much as we can, need to have an assessment on things that are going to influence that cow getting pregnant or not. And if we do that, pretty much you have our cycle going here. Cows calve, they get pregnant, they calve again, and we keep turning that wheel. And that's what we want to do effortless, if possible. I'm putting here a very interesting table that Zoe has provided, and is pretty much putting in perspective all those problems that are happening around the transition period, and a little bit of the range, so how they're happening and the cost, and this is all based on published literature, so you can have these numbers. I'm not saying that your numbers are this, but it's at least something that we always know that, okay, that costs money as well. That may take my cows out of the herd a little bit sooner, and that may be affecting as well my primordial follicle, and therefore reproduction, like we see from the work from Ribeiro. So just a nice way of putting those things out there. To understand why these cows go over such a trouble period, and Drakeley and Grummer define the transition period as the most challenging for the dairy cow. This is one point here. I'm putting here in kilos. So a cow that is 725 kilos, pretty much, if you want to know in pounds, kind of double that number. So let's say 450 pounds, just to be a little bit on the simple side. But you can see that the amount that she needs to eat in energy before and after calving is very easily met before calving, right? However, after calving, we know that cows cannot eat as much as they want. They start producing milk, so that negative energy balancing, well, this is going to be challenging. Negative energy balance start happening, and that's where we have a lot of strategies to try to mitigate that. But bottom line, it's much easier to meet the energy requirements of the cow before calving than after calving. So one thing also that we think, so here using the Cornell model, we have here, for example, what is the energy requirement of this cow that I'm describing. This is how much she's able to consume, for example, in early lactation 7 days after, and this is how much is going to milk. But we also have to think about it, not just in energy terms, but also in the protein. And here I'm talking about metabolizable protein. This is how much the cow needs. This is how much usually she is getting. And this is how much is going to milk. So bottom line, cows right after calving, they're not just deficient in energy, but they are deficient in protein as well. So if we think a little bit and try to understand what drives negative energy balance. And I've heard a lot of people saying, hey, my cows are thin and they lose a lot of body condition score, so I have a lot of negative energy balance. But that's because my cows produce too much milk. And they are kind of, in a weird way, kind of proud about it. My cows suck because they're too good, kind of the thing. I just look at the farmer and say, are you sure of that? And then I show this data here by Drakeley. So this is milk yield by week 3, right? So we have here a cow that is producing, let's say, 45, 48 kilos of milk per day, roughly 90 pounds per kilo per day, and she has this much negative energy balance. So let's call -4. You have a cow here that is producing 25 kilos, more than half, less than half, and she also is at the same level of negative energy balance. So milk production have nothing to do with negative energy balance. If there was an association about those two items, this is the line that we would see. As the cows produce more milk, they're going to be lower and lower and lower in negative energy balance. But that's not what we are seeing here, right? What we see is that no association. So one of the things that you may think about, okay, but you're talking only about milk yield. How about if I put protein and fat of the milk together and I do the solids corrected milk? Guess what? Same thing. No association at all between those two variables, milk or negative energy balance, right? So what is the association then? What is the deal? And bottom line, we see that there is a huge association between how much the cow is eating or dry matter intake with negative energy balance. So after calving, if cows eat more, they stay with less negative energy balance. And that's huge. So that's where I know that it's hard for farmers to measure the intake or how much the cows are eating, but everybody tells us that, you have to pick your fights. You cannot fight everything. This would be a fight that I would pick with the farmer in helping him. I'm not telling you guys to punch farmers. I'm just try to sit down and figure out with him how can he have an assessment of that. If it is every week, go with a shovel over there and measure and divide by the numbers of cows, something. It doesn't need to be exactly perfect, but some assessment. And that's going to help hugely the nutritionist to figure out how much those cows are eating and if any difference or in the diet needs or adjustment needs to be done. So that's very important. Intake, very important. So one other thing that we know, and you all know this, what's going on throughout lactation. And of course, if those three lines here, they're all parallel to each other. That's not a very good parallel, but if they were all parallel to each other, we would never have problems with cows having metabolic disorders or anything. But that's not the case. So we know that they're going to lose body condition score to supply that energy that is needed because they are not eating enough in the beginning of lactation. But one thing that we know is that whatever we feed during the dry period will affect the intakes during the fresh period. So that's something that we know. And I can show you one of the research showing this. So what was done here, okay, by Drake's group here, they were feeding the same diet before calving, right? And they were either calculating the requirement of the cow and feeding 81% of that, or they just fed ad libitum. Hey, cows, eat whatever you want, like almost all farms do that, right? And two things from this slide. First one, cows, they eat more than what they need. So if you think that you're going to put a bucket of M&Ms in front of somebody and they're going to eat just what they need for that day, cows don't do that. They're going to eat more than what they need. That's one first thing we saw. But the cows that ate at the control energy, they were able to eat more after calving. So that's the second topic that we saw here. So cows eat more than what they need. And also, if we control what they eat before calving, control energy, they are going to eat more after calving. That was the first indication of that. And here I have these three lines here. So red is going to be the cows that ate whatever they wanted. And again, we talk about the high energy diet, but actually it's some diets based on corn silage. So it can be the diet that you guys are feeding out there, right? We're going to classify that diet a little bit later. But we believe that controlling the energy or restricting that energy or adding fiber, and we call here the straw, like a rough forage, to limit the intake and by that controlling the intake of energy, the cow behaves similarly metabolically. So they have a lower body condition score than the cows in the high energy. We think that they have lower NIFA when compared to with the high energy. They have lower amount of lipids inside the liver when compared to high energy, and they have lower beta-hydroxybutyrate as well. So metabolically, restricting the energy or giving fiber to control the intake and by then controlling the energy, they seem to behave metabolically the same. So one thing that we did, and again, there's a lot of information here that I'm talking about, and I'm going to show even more. Any information you guys can ask me, and I can make sure you guys get exposed to the papers, and you can read all the tiny bits of information from that very complete if you want. Just get in touch with us, and we will make sure that happens. So we did a meta-analysis approach where we put a bunch of cows together from 7 different experiments done here in Illinois, and we classify them as getting high energy or a control energy before calving. After calving, all the diets, all the trials, they had the same diet, okay? So the only difference was before. calving. And one of the things that we saw is that cows that had the control energy diet, they ate more energy after calving. So there's an indication that, again, cows that eat a control energy diet before calving, they're able to consume more energy after calving. One thing, there is a Progressive Dairyman 2 articles there that I talk about the 10 steps, but one thing that I think is very helpful is, and it's going to depend here on the size of your cow, requirements and everything else, but that's just the relationship of the nutritionist with the feeder or the farmer saying, hey, we need to have cows eating at least 22 pounds in the average of the 3 weeks before calving. If that stuff to start going down, we need to see what's going on. And heat stress can interfere with that. Again, stimulating farmers to have an assessment of the intake before calving. And here's just one idea on how to do it. But you work with your nutritionist and you figure out this. Body condition score, I think it's a tool that is very easy to have an assessment, but I think it gets overlooked because we don't know how to use the number. So hopefully I'm going to suggest you here and give you some ideas and some insight. So if I ask you, okay, tell me, and you got a piece of paper and you have to write that. Tell me what is the body condition score at drying off that you'd like your cows to be. Write the number from 1 to 5. What is the body condition score? Then do the same thing. What is the ideal body condition score at calving? You put the number there. And then what is the body condition score at breeding? What is the number that you want there? I'm going to give you 5 seconds and let the translator and myself get some air here. Okay, so you got those numbers. What do you want to see from 1 to 5? Keep it there, and we're going to come back to those, okay? You wrote those 3 numbers. You know what you want. Here you go. This is a very interesting research done by Phil Gainsworth, a group from England and from the UK. And what they did here, okay, what happens if I have cows calving fat throughout the lactation? What's going to happen? And as you guys may know, if you have fat cows on your farm in the dry period, you kind of know what's going to happen, right? And what's going to happen? Cows are going to lose body condition score. But now one thing that is a little bit less insightful is what happens with cows that calve thin. So if they have a lower body condition score, what happens with their body condition score throughout lactation? And one of the things that they found was kind of mind-blowing was that cows actually, they gain body condition score. So one point here is that I'm not saying that cows should calve thin. Don't start spreading the news around, hey, Dr. Cardoso, that Phil guy, is telling everybody to have cows calving at body condition score 2. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm just telling and challenging you guys to think that maybe that concept of having cows calving at 3.5 is not what we should have today. So cows, depending on their genetics, so that means that every farm is going to be different, at 14 to 16 weeks, they're going to come to the same body condition score, right? So depending on your farm, they may have to calve a little bit thinner so they get to that body condition score at 14, 16 weeks without big changes. And every time, sometimes you hear, oh, our cows are getting thinner. This is why, okay? So this is a research from the same group, and they get cows from studies, older studies from the 80s, or studies from the 2000s, okay? So what was the body condition score at calving for those cows to have a 0 change in body condition score in the first 10 to 12 weeks of lactation? And they saw that for the older studies, that was 249. For the newer studies, that's 210. So just think about it. 60 years ago, think about the Holstein Friesian cow, short little chubby thing, and think about the cows today. Things change. So I'm going to challenge you to think that the 3.5 body condition score at dry off and or 3.75 some people, and that may be a little bit different nowadays because our cows are changing. And why I'm telling you that having thin cows is not a good idea. So this is an interesting research, and here we are doing trimethylhistidine creatinine ratio. So pretty much have an assessment on how much protein is being used from muscle on those cows. So you can see that before calving, everybody is using the same amount of protein coming from muscle. However, after calving, you can see that the cows that are with lower body condition score, they are using more protein that is coming from muscle. So that's not a good thing. So that's what I'm telling you. Hey, having cows with lower body condition score, that's not very a good strategy. But I also think that we don't understand that very well. So if a cow is losing body condition score after calving, I go there, take urine or blood samples, and I see the body BHB, I can tell if she's sick or not. Now, a thin cow, what do? We don't have any easy cow side measurement that I can do to tell if that cow is in trouble or not. So I think maybe even we should supply more protein to those thin cows. We don't know. I think we should have more research on those areas. So bottom line, I really don't care, and don't get frustrated with me here, but I don't care if you put 2 or if you put 3 or 4 here. I don't care the number you put it here. What I care is that if you get this number and subtract from this number bottom here, the difference, that's what's going to matter. And the same thing from here to here, what is the difference? So if you can have your cows change in body condition score be 0.5 or less, you are a champion. That's very awesome and amazing and very hard to get. But if you can keep at 0.75 or lower, okay, the difference between this body condition scores here, you are doing a good job. If you're getting at 1 body condition score unit change between those items, you are losing in reproduction, in health, and we could do a whole other webinar just talking about body condition score change or body condition score, how does that affect your herd. So, and one thing that we get caught up sometimes, and there's a whole article here that I wrote on Hordes Dairyman, but if I go back here, if you can teach your guys to tell me the U or tell me if the cow has the V, that's going to be a huge thing. So for example, the V means that the cow has 3 or less body condition score. The U, okay, if I look at the pins of the cows, it's going to be 325 or more. So those fresh cows, as soon as they get to the U, perhaps is the moment that we need to move them from a different group. So don't let cows get too fat. Perhaps maintaining those cows at 275 and including the U or V in the cows as an item for group change, that can help you to keep the cows thin and keep the cows in a good shape. Other thing done very nicely by the Wisconsin group, Milo Wiltbank and Paul Fricke, is that they measure body condition score at calving and at 21 days postpartum, and they saw that the cows that gained body condition score in that period, they got pregnant much faster than the cows that maintained or lost. So there's a huge impact on body condition score loss and reproduction. And in our data, from our meta-analysis, what we saw was that the cows that were eating the control energy diet before calving, from weeks 1 to 6, they lost less body condition score. So again, that may be one of the indications, because we just saw that they ate more energy, but also when we look at reproduction, we saw that the cows that got the control energy before calving, they got pregnant a little bit sooner than the high energy. Not huge difference here, but at least it's not bothering. So it seems that the control energy before calving is a pretty good deal for those cows. Now, one of the things that is very important is the high diet, and I've been talking about control energy. I mean, there's a whole webinar that you guys can go on Hordsman. horse dairy, and they have a lot of things of Dr. Drakely talking about it. But I just want to give you the idea is that we are diluting the energy of that diet. And in our case here in the U.S., it's heavily based on corn silage. Perhaps in your country, in China, in Argentina, that could be the opposite thing. That could be add energy to make it the cows get the energy they want. So it's not more, mean less. It's giving the cow what she needs. And in the U.S., like I said, if we add wheat straw, low energy to the diets, we make the diet have this concentration here of energy. So what means that for the cow that she needs, let's say 15 megacals per day, if she eats 25 pounds, she is okay. Now, if there is a huge diet with a lot of energy, and again, this may be the diet that you guys have in your farm based on corn silage, letting cows eat whatever they want. This one, the cows can eat whatever they want, that the straw will limit the intake. This one, there's no straw to limit. They're going to eat more than what they need. And guess what? To get that energy that they need, the 15, if they only eat 20 pounds, they are done already. So what happens? They easily start consuming more energy. And if you guys want to think about it on that concept, it's just like this high energy diet, you're feeding this baby here, okay? I don't do any commercials here, but this baby called Triple Whopper from Burger King, I have 1,250 calories just in the sandwich. So that means if my requirement is 2,000 calories per day, if I eat one of this and 3 cookies, I should be done by the day. However, I could be eating more salads or more chicken breasts and lean meat and all this stuff easier. So that's kind of the relationship. We don't want to feed a high energy content to those cows. So this is kind of the diet ingredients they look like. So we in a percentage of dry matter. So we end up adding up a lot of the wheat straw, and to make sure that that's still eatable by the cow, that the dry matter doesn't get too high, we kind of have to add water to that. So here you can see that it then ends up with a lower energy than the high energy diet. And one of the things that we believe it's happening when we are feeding those high energy diets before calving is that this is an experiment. We fed a low energy or a high energy diet. We didn't see any differences in body condition score on those cows or even body weight, but look the difference on adipose tissue inside the belly of those cows. So the cows, even for 57 days, not a long period, so a dry period, if they eat this diet, they're going to end up with more adipose tissue inside, even though if we don't catch a difference in body condition score. And some of us can get associated where we already know that the perimeter of your belly can tell your chances of getting heart disease or something like that. So in a perspective, that was a 75% increase in the visceral adipose tissue. So that's why we think it's not a very good deal to give those diets with a higher energy component. This, and I want to highlight, this is how a control energy diet looks like. Sometimes we get called and they tell me that this is their high control energy diet. So it's not just throwing straw at the cows and let them figure out. That's not at all. So that's where it comes that the biggest problem with this diet is sorting. So, for example, here.
Okay, I have to interrupt
Okay.
and switch over to sharing my screen. So just a second.
Yeah, so you can see that the cows, they are moving their heads all sideways to sort their diet. And the cows in the right, they put their heads down and they are eating. So you can see easily there is sorting happening in the left, and there is no sorting happening when cows put their head down. You can do a Penn State box just when you feed the diet and after you feed the diet and see the difference. If then there is a low difference or less than 15% difference in the pens, the sieves, then that'll be okay. And this is one of the ways that we figure out here. So we do have a hay buster. So we pre-chop that straw and put it in a bin in the commodity shed, and then we get from there and put in the mixer. And that makes our TMR much better and much well mixed. So sorting is a big deal. It's not just throwing or badly mixing the straw. So some of the recommendations, we talk about the energy. The other thing that I would like to highlight for you guys is what we talk about crude protein, okay? So crude protein, just let's get back to that because I don't think it's the best item for us to identify or characterize this diet for dry cows, right? So this is our cow, and crude protein is this number here that we are talking, but the same diet with the same crude protein can have different degradable protein versus undegradable protein. That can have different amounts of amino acids that are soluble. This is going to be the microbial protein. And what we really want to know is what is the metabolizable protein that is getting into the intestine of the cow, and that's what she's going to be using. And I can even charge and challenge that, okay, what is the profile of amino acids on that metabolizable protein that we have? So that's why we cannot make diets for cows in an Excel sheet. We need a model that is going to tell me, okay, how much microbial protein is this diet producing based on all the things that I'm feeding this cow, right? What is the degradable versus undegradable protein? So what I want to talk to you guys about is that really looking at what is the amount of metabolizable protein. And again, grams per day, that's what cows eat. Percentage, sometimes they don't like that, right? We need to know how many grams per day we are feeding of that. Feeding a high crude protein diet is not a good idea. And one of the things when we look at the reproduction side of things is that this experiment, for example, they look at the urine pH, right? And they get a heifer and they infuse with saline. So it's pretty much water, let's say, okay? And they saw that the pH in the uterus didn't change, neither the plasmaurea nitrogen. Now, when they add urea, you can see that, of course, the nitrogen in blood goes up as expected. That's related to, okay, what happens if I feed a lot of protein to my cow? The plasmaurea nitrogen or the milkurea nitrogen is going to go up, and the pH in the uterus goes down. So that's one of the reasons why feeding a lot of protein is not a good deal for cows. And again, we suggest you feeding more than 1,200 grams per day of metabolizable protein, and make sure that your software that you're using give you an assessment of the two main limiting amino acids in dairy cows. There are methionine and lysine. So we know that if we supplement rumen-protected lysine and methionine to cows, they're going to produce more milk, they're going to produce more protein, and sometimes they're going to produce more fat. So more milk components with rumen-protected amino acids, methionine and lysine, we know that already. Now, what we want to know is that if I feed more methionine or the methionine that the cow needs, am I going to get lower embryonic deaths? Why we thought about that? This is a very nice paper, okay? So they're trying to develop rat embryos, and they are changing the media where these embryos are being grown, like fertilization in vitro, for example, in vitro fertilization. So we have here, they have the cow serum as the base. If they put anything on the cow serum, so none, they're going to have this much growth of embryos, so embryo protein, and all of them are going to be abnormal. Now, if I add amino acids and vitamins, the embryo grows more protein, and 0 of them are abnormal. If I do amino acids, again, same thing. If I do vitamins, oops, we went backwards. All the embryos have problems. If I give amino acids without methionine, same thing. Everybody has a problem. So what happens is that if I feed methionine, if I put methionine in that media, all the embryos, they grew well. So that's the point that we want to verify, that because that's happening in this rat experiment. Every time I have methionine, I have good growth of the embryo. So we want to have an assessment on the follicles of cows and also in the embryo when cows were fed. So this experiment here is 72 cows. Okay, they were milked 3 times a day. We had a pre-calving diet, close up, a fresh cow diet, 0 to 30 days, and then a high cow diet, 31 to 72. We had 4 treatments: methionine, choline, both of them, or control. And I'm going to focus today on the methionine versus the control. That's the ones we saw the difference. We didn't see differences with the other ones. So this is the diet, pre-fresh, fresh, and high. Very common Midwestern diet. So for our region here in the U.S., a very common diet. This is how things analyzed. So you can see low to medium starch. Okay, nothing very special here. And as expected, the cows, they produce, with the methionine, they produce more protein and they produce more milk yield. So that's expected. They also ate more, so dry matter intake before calving and after calving was higher for the cows that were consuming methionine. And I think that's a really reflection of cows getting what they need, they perform better. So we even talk about supplementation, and I have that, but that's not. We are giving the cow what she needs. There is a requirement for methionine, and I'm fulfilling that requirement. So one thing that we need to always think about it is what describes this, for our most used encyclopedia today, that is Wikipedia, right? All the students, when you ask something, that's where they go for. What is describing this? And this is one word that is called efficiency, and it's different than being effective, okay? I think we are very effective in telling farmers to record a bunch of data, but I don't think we are very efficient in giving back or making sure those numbers are used in actions so the farm really can get some benefits from it. And it's pretty much, okay, I'm giving this to the cow. Is she giving me back or not? And that's a matter of that. So most of the time, things are too expensive. I think it's expensive if you do something and you don't see return. We should be looking at the return over our investment, or are we being more efficient? So I want to show this video here. And I'm not sure.
I have to do it, yes.
Okay. Okay, so what's happening there is that the grower agrees to play the game, so it's very effective in getting the other one to play. However, one of the things that she doesn't do is explain well how to do it, and actually she was supposed to fall to the back, not to the front. So I feel sometimes that you tell farmers to do a lot of things, but if they don't see the benefit out of this, why they're measuring that? Why you're asking them to do a lot of things? So pinpoint things. Intake, body condition score change. Are you feeding the right amino acids to the cow or not? Those are the things that I think we should be measuring. So here's a paper I'm going to talk about. It. Like I said, there's a lot of information here. I'm going to cut to the chase and tell you the most important thing out of it, but the stats, numbers, everything is in there. What we did was we followed, so we had 80 cows in the trial. Half of those, we followed them on day 7, okay? And every 2 days, we were able to measure the growth of the follicle. But when those follicles, and half of them, got to 16 millimeters, and that's kind of the average of the ovulation for a hosting, we aspirated. We put a needle over there, and we were able to aspirate that follicle. And one of the things that we were able to measure is the amount of amino acids on that fluid. And we saw that, yes, methionine is higher in concentration. So the follicular fluid, that's what we saw. So if we feed methionine to the cows, guess what? The first follicular wave, so we were following that. If we aspirate, there's more methionine there. No difference in lysine, tendency for histidine here. So that's a different topic. But when we provide the first limiting amino acid, the second one may appear. And here is something that I wish we could do very often in all farms, but we collected blood samples, and you can see that cows that were supplemented with methionine, they had more methionine concentration in blood. And I think that's bottom line. If you guys are feeding a rumen-protected source of methionine, you should have more. But I also, how much is more? Let's say they need to have more than 20, so you know they are getting the benefits. But I think that on average, cows here in our environment, if we are not supplementing or providing methionine, cows are short on that, especially cows that are over 35 or 40 kilos of milk per day, like me, 80, 90 pounds. That's for sure. Some assessment on uterine health. So we were able to put that little brush inside the body of the uterus. And one thing that we saw, we can make a slide and count the number of white blood cells. So that's the PMNs for polymorphonuclear. So those cells are related to endometritis. And one of the things that we saw was at 15 days, cows that were eating methionine, they had a higher PMN. However, at 72 days, the cows with methionine, they had lower PMN. And that's my point that I think we need to do a better job talking about, is that inflammation. I think inflammation can be good and can be bad. I think after calving, 50 days after calving, as much as I can clean my cow, or that she can defend herself to clean placenta and everything else, that's good. Now, I don't want a bunch of white blood cells when it's time for me to breed that cow. So I think that change is very important. And actually, in 2014, Steve LeBlanc from the University of Guelph, he did a pretty nice article in a fertility conference that we had in Ireland. And he talks about a model, and he tells that, hey, the healthy cows are the ones that can defend. So he's talking about inflammation, but they can defend themselves or clean themselves early, but then after week 3 postpartum, they are able to reduce. And the cows that are sick, they either don't respond at all because they are just not getting enough feed or they're not right, or they keep responding high the whole time. So I really think it's interesting. There's higher response early lactation, so cows can be with lower PMNs at the time of breeding. The other thing is that when we collect blood from these cows, the cows with methionine, they have a better ability, the neutrophils, the defense cells, white blood cells, to grab bacteria, but not just grab. When they grab it, they are able to kill more as well. That's what we do with this oxidative burst, the capacity of whenever the bacteria is in, to kill it. So it grabs more in the whole body of the cow. And again, not magic, just cows being fed the requirements, what they need. How about the embryos? We also superovulated, synchronized those cows, and at 72 days, we collected the embryos. I'll explain there. And we saw that the cows, okay, that had the methionine, they had more lipid in the embryo compared to control. I'm not saying that the embryos were fat. They had more lipids, and that's what this little picture is showing, than the control. We collaborate here with Peter Hansen in Florida, and now Emma DeNicole in UC Davis. They were able to do this work for us, and that's what we found. Now, putting that in a perspective, I'm going to show you here the last group of information. That's a research done by Milo's group, a very nice paper in PLOS ONE that is available. They fed methionine from day 30 to 128, so pretty much protected methionine or not. Okay, lots of work. Commercial farm, top dressing, making sure all the cows are eating, a huge amount of work here. I really commend the researchers for this, but that's the point. Rumen protected methionine or not, top dressed, and lots of cows, 300 cows, right? They had primiparas and multiparous cows as well. And the main thing that I want to show to you, when they checked pregnancy at 28 days, and then check again at 61, you can see that the primiparas, there was no difference in embryonic loss. However, in pregnancy losses, now look at this, 19% for the multiparas in control versus only 6% in methionine. And again, the 19 is not a huge number. Remember we said, hey, 15, that's happening. 10 to 20, that's happening. Why is that? So some of the thoughts, some of the things they were able to do is that this is an image of the uterus with the embryo here. They were able to measure all that volume, okay? And guess what? no difference in primiparous, but there is a statistical difference in the multipers. The cows that had the methionine, the embryo was larger than the embryos from cows in control. So remember, so by providing what the cow needs, that was the methionine, the embryo was able to grow, and perhaps a larger embryo was able to produce more interferon tau and tell the cow, hey, remember, I'm here. Please don't cycle again. And maybe that's why they kept more the pregnancies. And I think the extra lipid, perhaps, that we saw in our work at 7 days in a blastocyst, that can help, perhaps, the embryo, the lipid, as a source of energy. But we are looking more into what types of lipids and everything else, so we can kind of conclude on that. So, in conclusion, we saw this effect on the follicle and the embryo. We saw on the pregnancy, but now we still have a lot to learn about, okay, what's going to happen with that heifer calf when touch the ground? Is she going to be producing more milk or not? We already have some other research showing that there's a difference in gene expression in placenta when we feed methionine, and the calves are heavier from dams that were fed methionine. So it's a lot of good information, and again, we can have another webinar one day just talking about amino acids, and then we can narrow down to that in another opportunity. So remember, dry matter intake, that's the fight you want to pick. It's going to solve not just your transition cow problems, but a lot of other problems and help your nutritionist a lot to fine-tune your diet. Things that when we provide the amino acids that the cows require, that we are going to have success not just on the transition period, but we're going to have success on that cow getting pregnant as well. We saw effects on the follicle. We saw effects on the embryo that shows us that. And here is some of the numbers that I'm talking about. Well, how much, crude protein, even though I don't care about this much, I think you guys should focus on metabolizable protein. But this is what I think metabolizable methionine and lysine that you guys should be at this much. Here, I'm putting how much we fed of the product. So if you ask, hey, Phil, how much did you feed of that? Okay, 15 grams in the dry period and 20 grams per day of the product to those cows. We also fed a little bit of rumen-protected lysine. We use AgiPro here and Smart Amino M if you guys ask. This is how much we fed, and this is how much I think you guys should be. So we are counting on some of that coming from soybean meal, from blood meal, and everything else. And also, make sure you balance the ratio of those two amino acids and also match with energy. If you just increase or provide the amino acid without making sure you are providing the energy in the diet, that's going to be a bad idea. Cows are going to get thin, they're going to produce more milk, but you're going to, so make sure your software can give you that, okay? And pregnancy rate, we have lots of herds with 30% preg rate, so I think nowadays 20% is a number, and embryonic death. If you don't know, nutritionist or vet, I don't care. I think those are basic numbers that we should be following every month our farms or every 21 days, so we make sure that things are going okay. So with that, I would like to thank you guys again, and I'd be more than open for questions if we still have time.
I really enjoyed your talk, Phil. Thanks a lot. If you in the audience have questions, please don't hesitate to ask, and go ahead and write them either in the question and answer window or the chat window, and I will field them. That way we don't have to worry about whether your communication will work. We will alternate questions from our English language webinar with those of the hosting country. Join us next month as we are joined by Dr. Gordy Jones from Central Sands Dairy in Wisconsin. Gordy received his DVM from Michigan State University and spent 15 years in veterinary practice focused on dairy. He has since served as a nutritionist, facility cow comfort consultant, worked in consulting for Monsanto, helped design and manage Fair Oaks Dairy of 20,000 cows, and he now manages his own dairy. And dear to my heart, it seems to be well populated with Jerseys. Gordy has a very applied talk, and he will address cow management and feeding with an eye towards achieving excellence in both production and cow health. Having just finished our mini unit on transition cows, we are moving to a series that will address animal behavior and comfort. Dr. Jones's talk will be complemented by Dr. Marcia Endres in July. She's going to talk about robotics. That should be very interesting. And Trevor DeVries in September. He's going to address cow behavior. This month, we launched The Beef Nutritionist, a new webinar series based on The Nutritionist with a focus on beef cattle. This season, we'll have an abbreviated year with only 5 presentations. Our first was this afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time with Dr. Ale Relling from The Ohio State University on fetal programming. Many of you joined us for that. Our next webinar in The Beef Nutritionist is June 13th with Dr. Alfredo Di Costanzo from the University of Minnesota on backgrounding. And finally, I want to thank my co-hosts, AMTS USA and Global. My bosses helped make this possible for us to do this. Paula Turillo in Argentina, and we're going to put a special thank you to Rock River Laboratory for sponsoring The Nutritionist, and Tom Long from Hemingway in China. We are very thankful to our generous sponsors of the English language webinar series. They are Ajinomoto Heartland, is superior nutrition through amino acids, makers of AgiPro L, and Arm & Hammer Animal Health, makers of cattle feed ingredients that optimize dairy cattle health. Our silver sponsors are Dairyland Laboratories, Virtus, makers of Strata with EPA, DHA, omega-3s, and Prequel with omega-6s, Cumberland Valley Analytical Services, Chemin, featuring USA Lysine, Dairy One Forage Laboratory, R&D Life Scientists, and AB Vista. Our bronze sponsors are Amino Max, Purdue Agribusiness, Jeffo, Quality Liquid Feeds, Adiseo, Origination Inc., and Novita, makers of Novamil. The floor up to questions. I see that I have some questions in the chat window and the question and answer window, and I know that Paula has some questions too. So I'll go ahead and lead with a couple, and then I'll turn it over to Paula. So Dr. Cardoso, your break is over. I'm unmuting you, and I'm going to give presentation back to you in case you need to go back to any slides.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So the first question I'm going to lead with is from Andrea Bellingeri, and he says, in the last year in Italy, many nutritionists suggest a single group dry cow based on ad libitum hay and provide a solid sugar cube based mainly on molasses and minerals. And I'm pretty sure I saw one of those when I was in Italy a couple of years ago. What do you think about that?
So I think I will break down, if I may, in some of the components of the question. So for example, having one dry group, we have some research on far off, close up, or one dry group, and it seems that one dry group works just fine. So we were using around 40 days or at least 30 days. It depends on a lot of the management, but one dry group in a control energy diet, it's fine, works well. Now the hay, I'm assuming that hay is chopped and mixed with the TMR. So if you're just throwing the hay, I would not be comfortable on the cows going for that. It's the same thing you tell everyone and your kids, hey, eat your vegetables. It's kind of, I'm not sure cows are going to be searching for that if they can. And I think the solid sugar cube, sometimes if, like molasses with the minerals, that's a fine strategy to supply that mineral. But I would count on that being a problem on the energy side of things. And I think that's my consideration. I think that's a good management strategy for providing those, especially trace minerals for cows in that form. They do that on pasture as well. I've seen it. So no big deal on that side of things. That's fine. But on the bunk, make sure that the cows are getting the hay in a way that is mixed, probably chopped with the whole corn silage or other side of diets. So make sure the cows eat. And I think go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think Andrea will probably address it in an addendum to his chat, but the farm that I saw it on was in the Parma region where they're not feeding any ensiled feeds. So the dry cows are, I believe, strictly on hay, and then to that is this rather massive combination block that I think he's describing. Yes, he says they just put out long hay and the big cubes. And I'm going to say the cube was probably about 4 feet by 4 feet.
Yeah. So my suggestion, if that's the only thing they have, that's the hay, and they are consuming this first, have an idea on how much they're eating, right? And you have an idea on how much they're consuming on that cube that I'm assuming then is just not molasses. It has other energy sources there.
I actually grabbed a tag, but I would not be able to dig that out real fast right now.
And the weight of the cube, throw it there. After a week, how much do you have left over? Divide by the numbers of cows you have there, and try to get an assessment on how much of that hay they are eating, and figure out how much energy you think they're eating.
Yeah.
And if that's around what the cow needs, between 15, 16.
He has some real, it sounds like he has some real concerns about this. It's interesting. If while Paul is asking questions and I can dig around in my pictures, I'll see if I can come up with a picture of this block. The second question that I'm going to ask is from Bernardo Menichetti, and he says, assuming that we are feeding an energy-restricted diet during the far-off period, for example, 1.3 megacows per kilogram, do you see any advantage to feed a stepped-up diet during the close-up period, for example, 1.45 megacows per kilogram, or just feed restricted energy diet, 1.3 megacows per kilogram, for the whole dry period? If so, how much energy should this diet have?
Okay, good question. And so our perspective and everything we've done here on the research side of things, and some of the farms that we follow up, and again, next month when Gordy Jones talks about it, he's going to talk about again, he's going to call the Goldilocks diet. So, but we've been feeding one group and a control energy diet the whole time without stepping up, and making sure, again, cows are not sorting, that they are eating enough of that mixture. That's no problem. So we don't see any advantage in doing the step up, right? So you could stay at 130 the whole time, no big deal. One thing that I want to highlight though, in the step up, we thought in the past, or there was some indication on, okay, we need to bring energy a little bit up. But I think there is a concern that we need to be feeding things that are similar before calving and after calving. So if we are doing our 130, usually going to be at starch levels, that's going to be between 13 to 16, for example, okay? 14 to 16% of dry matter of starch. That's going to be your diet before calving. I would not recommend you to have the fresh cow diet to be at 30% starch. So your switch in fiber terms and in energy terms cannot be huge. So that's kind of one of the things. Now, some people, they're doing a 2-week where they go at 22 starch and then they jump at 30. But usually the farms that have been more successful, they have the ability to feed a fresh cow diet for 2 to 3 or 2 to 4 weeks, depends on amount of calving, size of the pen, but they're able to limit that and make that transition a little bit better, and then they go to higher. Now, if your diets have 22% starch the whole time, then I would not be worried about it. So, yeah, I don't see the need to go to 145. I see it working at 130. Make sure cows have the intake, that they eat what you think they're going to eat. Like I said, sorting is a big problem. Make sure it's not too dry that cows are eating, so you may have to add water. Some people add whey, so that gets a little bit more in a specific case. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Paula to ask some questions from the Argentinian side. Go ahead, Paula.
Hi, Phil. Thank you
Hello.
for the presentation. It was great. Thank you very much. I have a lot of questions here from Argentina. So I will begin with 2 questions from Pedro. He wants to know how was the performance regarding milk yield of cows with embryo losses, and which was the voluntary waiting period of cows in that research.
Okay, very good questions, and some of those I would have to go back to the paper. So there was, in that case, in that commercial farm, remember they fed from 30 days to 128 days. They didn't see differences in a milk yield in that period, and the voluntary waiting period I don't recall, but I mean it was the same between those two. Okay. And I really appreciate the question, because when we talk about preg rates and everything else, we need to make sure that when we compare farmers that they are using, or we are assuming they have the same voluntary waiting period, because your preg rates, the numbers can be totally off just by your selection on the software, right? But Pedro can send me an email, or I can send to you guys the +1 paper, and then that has the whole description on the embryonic death side of things.
Okay, Paula, why don't you keep going for a couple?
Yes, there is another question from Pedro. Would you suggest methionine supplementation to increase conception rate?
Wow, so here you go. And again, supplementation, I try not to use that word, even though I notice I put in my slide, so doesn't help. But the point is, if Pedro is feeding cows in Argentina, what is the production? Then he's going to put that in AMTS, and then AMTS is going to show him, hey, my friend, you are short this many grams in methionine, right? Based on CNCPS and Cornell biology, that's what's going on. And if I do that in farmers here in the Midwest, that's very clear. So I know that we are short. So what I'm doing is just supplying that methionine for the requirement of the cow. That's it. And in our case, it's 20 grams per day. So I think that's needed for the follicle to develop. And for ovulation, I didn't show some of the data, but we actually were able to see some of those cells inside the follicle and do some gene expression. And you can see that some of those genes are expressed different. So if I provide the methionine, that is a nutrient, amino acid that the cow needs, she's able to express more some of the genes related with the estrogen pathway. So that's one thing. Then we see this difference in the lipids. So yes, I think especially during the transition period and until we get those cows pregnant at 70, 80 days or 100 days in milk, I think it's very important to feed what she needs. But now, if your cows are producing 10 kilos, 20 pounds per day, then plugging in the software, probably you should be able to feed enough with soybean meal and corn. But in our case here, 90 pounds of milk or 80 pounds or 70 pounds, that's not the case. We see something missing. So, yeah, I think there's a whole involvement of those amino acids, specifically methionine, that we know more about it on reproduction. Like I said, in another trial with even a different product, but as a protected methionine, we were able to collect the placenta that was coming out of the cows, and we did gene expression, and guess what? There's a difference. especially in the nutrient transport in the caruncular region, that there is more nutrients coming from the mom to the calf, and that's why they are heavier. So there's a whole, hey, the embryo is different, hey, embryonic death is different, hey, the placenta is different, hey, the calf is being born with more weight. And I think soon we're going to be able to follow those animals and see, hey, guess what? They produce more milk than cows from dams that didn't have the methionine. And I think it's not magic. It's just giving what the cow is required to. So I think that was a long story, but hopefully gives some perspective.
Yes, great. And regarding your answer, do you think we have a good indicator about methionine level in cows, in our cows?
Muy buena pregunta. Me gusta mucho esta pregunta, que gostaria de ter una respuesta clara con una muestra.
Hablando en español.
Sí. Oh, I think. Oh, you're recording. I may have an answer in English, right? Just to make sure we record and everybody can understand. So.
Yes, please.
Okay. Got it. I got excited a little bit. That's fine. Coming back to English. The most easy way for us in research is we collect blood samples and we see what is the concentration. That's the bottom line. If I'm feeding something, it needs to show up in blood. However, for us here, it costs $100 each sample, so it's very expensive. So in the field, the recommendation that I have is, for example, if we're talking about Holsteins, right? If I'm feeding Holsteins the right way, they should be expressing through their milk pretty much the average of the breed. So for example, if your herd has milk protein of 2.9, and we know that the average of the breed here in the US is 3.2, I think it's already an indication that, bottom line, you are short in protein. Most likely, it's going to be the two main limiting amino acids, methionine or lysine. So right there, I think is the first indication that you are short in methionine. Doesn't matter if you have 20 crude protein. If you don't have methionine, that cow will be in 2.9. Now we're getting a little bit of more of the hot weather here, but our farm at the University of Illinois, we had milk samples of Holstein cows at 3.5 true protein, right? So if you guys down there analyze crude protein, you can add 2 more decimal points. So my 3.5 would be your 3.7 in Holsteins, because we feed 4 amino acids in a 16% crude protein diet. So I think that's where the software comes very handy, is that you can play that. Hey, how about we go from 18 to 16% crude protein, but we add this amino acid here. And you're going to see that even the economics is going to start working, and you're going to be feeding well. So bottom line, if you have the $100 and you pull a bunch of cow's blood and then you figure out, that's fine. But first indication would be if your cows are producing the average amount of milk protein. And I think that's the first one. And I know there are people that are trying to develop cheaper ways of doing that, or even some enzymatic tests on milk, but I don't think that's ready available yet. But so far would be putting your diets on a software, see what's going on. If the software is telling you you're short, probably you are short. If your cows are telling you you're short by not having a lot of the average milk protein, probably you're short. So good indication to start feeding the rumen-protected methionine.
Thank you. I'm going to take a turn while Paula gathers up. She has lots of questions. First of all, I have a picture to share.
Oh, look at this.
So this is I believe this is the block that he's talking about.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So one of the things that come to mind here is that, you really don't want to overcrowd, but so that wagon that is in the corner there is just feeding the hay, right? No grain at all.
Well, dry cows, I believe they were only getting hay. Maybe Andrea will say. The wagon is used for the lactating ration. So,
yeah.
And I'm pretty sure I took a picture. This is a group of dry cows on a big bedded pack.
Mm-hmm. So you definitely don't want to overcrowd and have cows fighting over that block, right? I'm not sure what is his experience on how many blocks per number of cows to avoid that, but I'll be a little bit nervous about that. But I'll just, first thing I would be curious to is that how fast is that block disappearing? So I don't know, he has 15 cows over there. In 1 week, how much of that block disappears? And just wait, when you put it, wait after a week or two, divide by the number of the cows, see how much of that hay is disappearing, and he can tell me how much energy those cows are eating. Putting in a concern that if you mix mature cows with first lactating, probably one is going to beat the other one. So again, overcrowding here may be a big thing. And if these cows are behaving pretty good, that they have no retained placenta, no DAs, nothing after calving, why move, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to
Why
remember
change?
what that group looked like, and I think they were a little bit on the heavy body condition score side, but I can't remember. This was 2 years ago.
Yeah, but it seems to me that it's kind of there's a lot of room for competition between cows there that could make that don't work. And
Mhm. Mhm.
it seems they would be too short on energy, to be honest. But you'd have to.
Yeah. Okay, so moving away from that, I have a question from Sami Ezadawe, and he is saying, and this may take me a few times to get through because it's a fairly long question and I have a little window. We are dividing dry cows into two groups, dry and close-up, and we adjusted the dry cow ration on to about 1.4 megacals per kilogram dry matter, crude protein 14%. The close-up ration is 15.5% crude protein, and they're using amino acid supplemented lysine adjusted on 6.5% of MP. I don't know if you can see this. It might be easier if I share it to your chat window so that you can get all these numbers when I get
I'm
through
taking
it.
notes here, so
Okay.
you're good.
All right, good. The balance is about 100%, 110% of the requirements. The methionine is about 2.3% of the MP, about 20 grams balance along with protected choline. The results on cattle performance is very good on all sides, production, reproduction, and immunity. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's perfect, especially he's balancing 4 amino acids, and 1.3, 1.4, that's good for me.
Okay.
And I would just remember that energy needs to be correlated with our big fight. Remember, that is the intake. So if your cows, they eat a little bit less than what I think, then I may need 1.4. If I know that they can eat a little bit more, I may need 1.3. So it's kind of the fine tune, but I'm happy that you are not at 1.6, But that could be limited, and then involves comfort, how much your cows can eat. That changes a lot, how many fens you have, what type of bedding you're using. So I think if things are working, and if you have the opportunity to do choline, I think there was a little bit of confusion in the field on choline and methionine being the same. I think they're very different, and I think there's room for both in the diet. So I think that seems to be a pretty good diet.
Okay, terrific. This is a question from Bernardo Mendicetti. What would be the recommendation to producers regarding the goal body condition score of cows at calving? Besides providing there's more. Besides providing an average body condition score, should we also recommend a measure of variation on the body condition score of cows within the close-up pen? For example, having less than 20% of the cows with a body condition score of greater than 3.5 or less than 3.0.
So it's a good question because I can kind of reinforce my topic. My challenge and kind of teasing to you guys was that I don't care the body condition score you have in the close-up pen. And you could do the same thing. Get your cows 20-30% of that pen. What is the body condition score? But go to the fresh pen, right? And tell me what is the body condition score and tell me what is the change. And just focus on the change, because If your cows are at 3 in the close-up pen, and then they go to 2.5, and then when you're drying they are at 3, I'm happy with you. You're doing a 0.5 difference. Now, if you go 3.5 in the close-up pen, your cows cannot go below 3. And that's, at least here in the U.S., my reality is that cows go to 2.25, 2.5, depending, because there's a lot of push for those cows genetically to produce milk. So I don't want to go 3.5 in the close-up because I know they're going to drop to 2.5. So I'd rather have 20% of the cows or all the cows. That's more on a strategy of how many cows you have and how much labor you have to help you with that. But let's say the strategy you're talking about, 30% of the cows at 3 body condition score close-up, and if you have 30% of your cows in the fresh pen at 2.5, that's fine. That's a 0.5 difference. And I think if you start following that, it's going to be more relevant than just what is the body condition score at the close-up pen. But try to look at the difference. And if you shoot for 0.5, it's good. But you're going to see that you're going to be at 0.25, or sometimes of the year you may be at 1. And then, like I said, there's a whole body of literature talking about how that difference in body condition score from dry to lactating, or even within lactation, affect hoof health and reproduction and health of cows. So try to look at those differences and then you target, because some farms, they have more ability to provide energy to cows. Some farms, they're going to have more ability to provide protein. I'm talking better forage, worse forage, more access to corn, lower access to corn, no access to corn, so that's where the difference comes on trying to make a recommendations for body condition score, and the numbers fails because of that. I can put body weight pretty easy here in the U.S. with corn at $3 a bushel. That's not the same in Europe. And I have blood meal, a source of rumen degradable protein, back in Brazil and Europe. You don't have that opportunity. So you have to play with the nutritionists on that point. But bottom line, what is the change?
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Tom Long for the Chinese audience, and he asks, and I don't know if you will know this, is the methionine supplement available in China?
That's a good point. I don't know. I know it's available in, no, I'm pretty sure yes, because this product that we're talking about, actually, one of the plants is in China. It's Martamine from Edicel. So I'm.
Okay, I am going to see if Paula is ready to ask. I know she has lots of questions. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm here. I have a question from Carlos. Can you make some comments about the milk curve of cows, milk yield of cows with low body condition score at calving?
So let's see if I understand the question. So low body condition score at calving and comments on milk yield. So one of the things is that those cows, in that research, what happened is that those cows produce more milk than the cows that were losing body condition score. So they were thin, they were gaining body condition score, they were producing more milk, and they were eating more. So they could get to that average body condition score at 14 to 16 weeks after calving. So that's what was going on. So it's pretty much an adjustment of the cow to get to that average body condition score. And that's what I'm saying. If in our genetic, that average may be 275. 20 years ago, that average was 3.5. So that's why we had in our mind, I need to dry my cow at 3.5. Then she goes to 3 and she goes back to 3.5. Nowadays, she's going to go to 2.5, 275 because we put more genetics and more effort in that milk production. So that's my perspective. But we don't want to go to 1.5 because then that's the slide I showed. That cow is catabolized on protein from muscle, and that's not good as well. So probably the cows, if they are too thin, we should be adding more protein than what is our requirement. Again, and from a research side of things, we get very limited because most of our trials, we do, cows that are on average in body condition score. We have very few trials or information on, okay, this is all fat cows, this is all very thin cows. So we kind of get limited to that, but I think that's kind of the answer, that the cow is going to be eating more because she needs to get to that body condition score, and she's going to produce more milk. But then you always have to ask at what cost. And probably if she's too thin, it's going to be her muscle, and that may get to some of other problems.
Okay, great. A question from William. Would you recommend the use of rumen-protected fat in fresh cows? And if so, what would be the right source of rumen-protected fat? And what about the fatty acids profile?
I see. I think there's like so rumen-protected fat, and actually that trial where we talk about the control energy diet, actually the original idea was to research rumen-protected fat in the transition period, in the dry period for cows. And I think there's a lot of results out there that could tell both things, that is good or that is bad. One thing that we have to agree is that there's not a push for more energy, so cows can easily eat their energy before calving. So I don't see that happening. A lot of research pointing out to really rumen-protected fat in the dry period is really important for that cow. So you find research both ways. Fresh cow, then again, I think it comes back to what is your ability to provide energy for that cow. And then I think it's a pretty good strategy sometimes in summer months when intakes are lower. So I think there is a use for that. And I think now we are trying to understand a little bit more on the type of the fatty acids that you're feeding. And then it comes back from, are we feeding stearic acid? Are we feeding palmitic acid? And what are the effects on the cow and the butter fat? So I would say that a mixture of those two seems to be very interesting, not just one or the other, but a mixture of those. But I think we still need to learn a little bit more on what's going on in the milk and how is that related to the metabolism of the cow, because some of the things we've been learning is that the adipose tissue has a pretty important role on inflammation in the cow. And it seems like some of those sources, they may be causing some of those effects as well in the inflammation system of the cow. So I think at this point, if we can have a product with a little bit of both, that would be kind of interesting. But again, especially after calving, I think that will be a good strategy, but also depends on types of energy that the farm can have after calving.
Okay, and going on with William, he wants to know if you recommend the use of urea in the fresh cow, and if not, why not?
I mean, I think the urea, right? I think that needs to be related. One of the things is with energy, right? So we are expecting that microbes in the rumen are going to use that nitrogen source to provide microbial protein, so that's a good idea. However, if there is not enough energy provided to those microbes in the rumen, that's not going to happen, right? So one of the ways to balance that is milk urea nitrogen and see where you are at. I think in your software can give you that very nicely, and I'm used to using AMTS on how much of rumen degradable protein you have as percentage of that diet of the dry matter. And my field recommendation, I don't like to go over 10%. So if your sources, you're already more than 10% of RDP, I would not use urea. So my concerns are more about how to use it than use it or not. We use here in the US in some of the diets, and that's totally fine. But we really make sure, for example, that the percentage of RDP of the dry matter is not more than 10%. We may use urea to bring to that 10% or close to that. And another very, very practical thing, again, there is nothing related to that, but when I have on my diet my soluble fiber. I can get, for example, from soybean hulls and all those kind of things. And I add my starch and I add my sugar. And if I add those, I would like to have more than 40%. So if I have 10% soluble fiber, 20% starch, I would like to have 10% sugar in my diet. So usually what's going to happen, you're going to have 25% starch, 10% soluble fiber, and then you have 5% sugar. You get to your 40%. That's telling me, or it's a good indication for me on the field, that I have enough energy for those buds to use my urea. So I'm not sure if I complicated more than I answered the question, but hopefully that covered it a little bit.
Okay, I have a question from Tom Long, and I think he asked this in sort of relative terms. For dry cows, what weight should we maintain? And we know that cows vary quite a bit in weight, but maybe relative to what would be considered fighting weight. And for oat hay, how much can you use in dry cow feeding?
Okay, so during the dry period, ideally, the recommendation would be we don't want cows to change weight. So whatever you dried your cow, she should stay like that throughout the whole dry period. That should be the idea. What's the weight should we maintain? The one that the cow provides a good body condition score for your farm. So let's say if it's body condition score 3, the weight that she has there, because again, like you've mentioned, and the frame can vary, but body condition score gives us an idea of that weight plus if it is a good adipose tissue coverage or not in the cow. So I would say the weight that the cow doesn't change during the dry period. And oat hay, is that right? Oat hay, how much can you use for dry cows? Then it's a matter of figure out, putting that in the software, putting that in AMTS, and remember to check the potassium levels, right? You want to make sure your cows are right in energy, but they also not too far from being low potassium diet. So you can use oat hay, no big deal.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You can use alfalfa hay, you just need to make sure that calcium, potassium is not going to give you a big trouble over there.
All right, Paula, go ahead.
Yes, Phil. Luis wants some comments on choline use, if you can.
Sure. So choline and rumen-protected choline, right? It's being used especially, in that fat cow type of situation. And I think we have been learning more and more about it. We don't have a requirement at this point. I mean, we are writing again, not again, but the new NRC for dairy cows is coming up this year, hopefully. So the last one we have is 2001, and we have no clear definition of a requirement for choline. But we understand the whole of choline and phosphatidylcholine, and how does that help the cow to really export that fat out of the liver. So all that transition from a high body condition score or lower body condition score, choline would be able to help with that. So I think it's a product that I think we're going to learn more and more. I think there's some whole role in methylation that we need to do more work on, but that's very more on the basic side of things. But I think definitely farms experience any changes in body condition score more than what we talk about here, 0.5, 0.75, and if they can, they should be feeding rumen protected methionine, especially during the choline, especially during the transition period.
Great. And the last one from Pedro. Did you measure progesterone in the embryo loss research?
Yeah, so that information I would have to look in the paper. so I can send Pedro the paper. And again, that was the research done by Milo's group in Wisconsin, and then I'm pretty sure they measure that, and it's in the paper.
And I have another one. When you look at body condition score, what do you see? I mean, you're working with a herd, so do you look at total variation in the herd, or what do you look at?
So what I look at, I think and that's kind of, I suggested 3 points. So if I go today at the farm, I'm going to see the cows that are drying off. I'm going to see the cows that are calving, and I'm going to see the cows that are drying off. So no, breeding. So you tell me, okay, I'm breeding these cows, and I go there and I'm going to see body condition score for those cows, and then I'll see those 3 groups of cows in your farm, and I'm going to do the math on how is the body condition score translating. And then I'll keep doing that every month or every 2 weeks that I go to your farm. I'm going to keep that in mind, and we see how it goes. So usually if your cows at dry off have on average 3.5, and in the fresh pen they have 2.5, I know there is some opportunity. Either your cows are too fat or they are too thin. So that's kind of the approach that we do. So it's not following, you could do that, but that would take just too much time. I see cow number 25. She is this body condition score. Now she's going to calve at that body condition score. Now she's going to dry, and then I do a graph of, no. I think it's more like a population type of approach where you visit the farm and you see those 3 groups. You could create other groups. I want to see average body condition score in fresh, in high, and low groups. That's fine too. But just have that assessment of what is the average body condition score on those groups and how much they are changing.
Okay, so you finally work with the average. That was the question. You don't look at any deviation in that herd. So
deviation.
I mean variation within the herd, because maybe you have an average of 3, but there are a high proportion of cows with low body condition score and a high proportion of cows with high body condition score.
But how are you defining low and high? That's my point. What is high and what is low? You're already trying to give a number, right?
Yes.
So it's not like you can do the range, that's fine too. So on range, I'm having my cows in the dry period between 2.8 and 3.2. On average is 3. And then in the fresh pen, they are from 2 to 2.5. And the average is 2.25. But either way, you're going to do the difference of those 2, they're going to be too high. So I don't want to tell you that high is more than 3 and low is low than 2, because each farm is going to be a little bit different. If you can keep 275 in the fresh period and 275 drying off, that's no difference in body condition score. That's awesome. But very likely to happen though, right?
Okay.
Does it make sense? If not, just let's do another example.
No, I think it's that was the question about if you look at the average or look at the proportion of cows with low or high body condition score. Okay.
I think that we might be all through with questions. I haven't seen any more come in. Phil, I think we all want to join in thanking you. We had so many questions, and it was clear because a lot of people really enjoyed what you were talking about and felt that they could get some really good answers. Paula she's going to say something. So go ahead, Paula.
Yes, I just wanted to say that everybody was very happy with the webinar. All of our assistants wrote in the chat window that this was a great presentation. So thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Everybody, be sure that you join us for next month's 2 webinars that we'll have. One will be Gordy Jones, and the beef webinar will be Alfredo Di Costanzo, and that will be at 1 o'clock for the beef webinar and 6 o'clock again for the dairy webinar. And we will get this recording back out to you. Dr. Cardoso, is it permissible for you if we send your presentation out as a PDF?
Sure.
Okay, because I've had people asking. Again, thank you very much, Phil. It was certainly very interesting and helpful to a lot of people, I think.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of the webinar series.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye. Bye.